So just for a quick introduction, this video, we're going to model this Nintendo Entertainment System controller from start to scratch. Now, I do want to preface this video by saying this is not exactly a beginner video. If you don't know anything about Maya, I do have two videos I recommend you watching, one being called Everything You Need to Know to Get Started in Maya, and one called Everything You Need to Know About Polygons. I will link those in the description below. So if you have no experience with Maya whatsoever, please watch those first, and then you should be able to get started pretty quickly on this project. All right, we're going to start by creating a project. Now, one trick I like to use instead of going to the project and creating a new project, and if I'm just modeling something, I don't really need all of these directories because I'm not planning to add dynamics or add audio clips or anything like that. So I really don't need all of these different directories. If you're just modeling something and maybe have a few images to use as reference. So instead, what I like to do is I'll go ahead and create a folder on my desktop or whichever directory I want to save this project to. And I'll just set that folder to my project. So if I go to my desktop here, I have a controller project folder, and I'm just going to go ahead and set that to my project. It's going to ask me if I'd like to create a workspace. And this is just something Maya uses to kind of save the interface as when you open up the new project. So I'm just going to create a default workspace. And then now my project is set. So if we go to that folder on my desktop, you can see that I had already have a Nintendo controller image in here that I'm going to use as reference. But now I also have a workspace.ml file in here that's just going to save my workspace. But this makes it a lot easier to kind of work with because instead of having all of those directories as you're modeling, you now just have like one file and you can just throw everything in that one file or folder as you're working. So the next thing I want to do is I want to create a cube that is the right dimensions for my NES controller. Now, I've already looked this up on Google, so let's go ahead and create a simple cube here. And then I'm going to go over to my channel box and go to the Polycube inputs here, and I'm going to enter my dimensions. Now, the dimensions I have are in millimeters. Maya works in centimeters, so all I need to do is move a decimal spot over a little bit. You don't have to be exactly precise with this. Just kind of get it in the ballpark, and you're going to be fine. So let me just zoom into my image I have over here on the side of my screen. And it looks like we are at about 12.34 wide. Then we have a depth or height that's going to be 1.75. And then our depth here is going to be 5.32. And then this is about the size of our NES controller. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is bring in my image that I'm going to be using as reference. So I'm going to bring that into my top view. So I'm going to hit spacebar and switch over to my top view here. I'm also going to hit 4 on my keyboard. So now we're just looking at the wireframe. To bring in my image to use as reference, I'm going to go to my viewport menu and go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. And now because I've already set my project to that folder with that image in it, it's going to take me right to that folder. So I'm going to click that. And here I can just sort of select my image plane, and I'm just going to kind of move it around and scale it to be about the size of that box that I made. So we get our dimensions right. And again, if it's not exactly the right dimensions, it's not a huge deal. We're just trying to get it close. Right. And then finally, if you want it to be where your image plane does not show in the perspective view, what you need to do is go to your attribute editor and just click in looking through camera. And then you're just going to see it in your top view and not your perspective view. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about a common issue that Maya has with image planes. Sometimes when you save and you open up Maya again, your image plane may not show up in your views. The easiest way to fix this is just to click on your image plane and then come over to your attribute editor and then click on and or click in all views and then back at looking through camera. So we have our image plane in there. I have some reference pulled up on another monitor that I'm going to keep an eye on. And now we can start working on our model. I'm going to hide my grid for now because that seems to be a bit distracting for me. And we're going to save our project. So I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As. And this should ideally take us right to the right folder. But I had been downloading some other projects here. So I'm going to go navigate to my controller project and just, we can even, if we want to be sure, we can even go set project and set our project right here as well. And I'm going to save it here. So I'm just going to type in NES controller and click Save As. And now we're basically ready to start modeling here. Now, the first thing I want to do is establish some of my bevels. If we are to look at our reference, so let's go into our side view here. You can see that all of the sides of the controller pretty much have a little bit of a bevel around them. The corners are round a little bit, and the sides, all the corners are kind of round, and they're about the same roundness. So I want to establish those bevels. But first, I also noticed that there's a little bit of a taper in the controller itself as it goes back. Now, this could just be a matter of perspective distortion. So I want to, once again, I want to go to my browser that I have pulled up right next to me, and I want to look up some reference here. So I'm just going to type in NES controller, and I know that you can't see this at the moment, but I'll bring over an image and we'll take a look at it. So this is what I'm looking at here. I just did a Google search for NES controller, and from most of the reference that I see here, here's a good one right here. This one may be a bit small, but it doesn't look like it tapers in at all, right? So like, this is a great point to bring up, just like the power of observation, right? Most art is a lot to do with observation and attention to detail. And sometimes as you see things in your reference images, may not necessarily be as they are in reality. So If I'm looking at this reference image here and looking at how it tapers back, my mind says maybe I should add in a taper to that, but I'm going to go look at some more reference images first to make sure that that's actually what it does. And then as I look at the reference images, I see, okay, that it doesn't actually do that. So I'm not going to model that taper in there. However, it does have a seam right down the middle. So just as an order of preparation for that, I'm going to go ahead and use my multi-cut tool here and hold down Control and Shift. And I'm going to make a edge loop right down the center at 50%. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is add in the little indentation here that goes on the inside, sort of like the grip pad, I guess. As you're playing the controller, it's sort of like a grippy surface. So that's the next thing we're going to do is add that. And to do that, we're going to use our extrude function. Now, you can use the extrude function in a couple different ways. The first one being is you can just grab the face that you want to extrude and hold down Shift with your move or scale tools, and then you can extrude it. The other way is to use your extrude function, which we're going to do here in a second. And then you also have this smart extrude function, which is new to Maya 2025. This is really cool, and I encourage you to look this up on your own. We won't really be using it in this project, but it is a really cool feature, and I do like it and use it a lot on other projects. But we're just going to use the extrude function itself here. So I'm going to just click extrude, and then we're going to use our offset to kind of offset that inward like that. And then I'm going to, let's go to our top view again, and let's just adjust the edges to match up with our reference here. So I'm going to move this one down, move this one down, and then my side edges here, I'm going to select them together and just use scale to kind of scale them out a tad. All right. And then I want to extrude down. So for that, I can just use my move tool, hold down Shift, extrude down a little bit. And I want those to taper in a little bit. So I'm going to switch to my scale tool and just sort of scale those in a little bit like that. So we get a little bit of an angle on those and they're not just straight down. All right, and the next thing I want to do is start adding in some bevels. Now, there's a few different bevels here, or I guess you can think of those as round corners. We have round corners around the sort of corners, four corners of the controller. We also have these sides or these edges here that have a little bit of a roundness to them. And if we zoom in really close here, we can see that these guys have a little bit of a round corner as well. So I always like to start with the bigger bevels and work my way down to the smaller bevels. So first, let's do our 4 bevels on the corners. I'm going to select all 4 of those corners. That's 8 edges total. And we're going to use our bevel function. And for this, I think I'm going to do 3 segments. And we'll do a fraction. I think a fraction of like 0.5 is probably good. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. And then we can do the bevels around the edge. So before that, I want to talk briefly about this little area right here. Now, I know from experience, this little area is going to cause me some issues when I go to bevel this outer edge. And the reason that is because there's a point or an edge right here that's not going to allow the bevel to go any further than that. Let me show you what I mean by that. So if I select bevel and I alter my fraction, you can see that I can't go beyond that point. Now, in this case, I think it's fine because I think that amount of bevel is probably more than enough. Maybe one more segment there. So something like that's probably fine. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, I do think I want to bevel it a bit more. So let's go ahead and fix that issue just by deleting some of these edges. So I'm going to select those edges and just do a Control Delete. I'm going to go ahead and do that for these as well. So we have something like this. And now when I select those edges, go all the way around. Once again, it did create an nGon there for us, but that's just the nature of modeling, and we will need to go in and fix our nGons. Let's go ahead and select our bottom edges here as well. And I'm just, again, holding down Shift to select those edges, to select multiple edges, that is. And then we're going to do bevel. And I think segments of 2 and maybe a fraction of 1. I think that looks pretty good. All right, and then finally, I want to do these corners here. I want to bevel these corners a little bit. So let's select all 4 of those corners. Again, I like to start with my big bevels and work my way down to the smaller bevels. And for these, I'm going to zoom into my top view here, so we can get a close-up view of that, how that's curved. And then we'll hit that with a bevel. And we'll do 2 segments and maybe a fraction of 0.3. I'm basically lining up this outer curve here. There are going to be some things with our model a bit exaggerated, and that's fine. We're not too worried about stuff like that. Sometimes you have to exaggerate details a little bit to have them show up properly. So we have our bevels, or our initial bevels, and the next thing I want to do is clean up my geometry a little bit. So start getting rid of the nGons. So to find your nGons, you're going to use Mesh, Cleanup, and then Cleanup Options. I'm going to edit, reset the settings here, and these are the settings that I like to use. I like to use Select Matching Polygons, because if you do cleanup matching polygons, Maya will just fix them, and a lot of times it does stuff that you don't want it to do. So instead, I just want to select it so I know where they are. I'm going to do faces with more than 4 sides, so that is our nGons. And then I'm going to do lamina and non-manifold geometry and click apply and close. So that will select our nGon. So we see that we have these 4 faces that are nGons. We have this face in the center that's an nGon. And then we have this one at the bottom that is an nGon. So let's fix these before we go further. Let's start with the one at the bottom here. To fix this, I'm just going to use my multi-cut tool, and we're just going to go and kind of join up some of these edges here. And I'm just clicking and dragging on the edge and using my G key to repeat the last action. So I'm going to do that for this side as well, trying to get both sides the same. And then for this one, this is still an nGon. So I'm going to go all the way from one end to the other like that. And then I'm going to go from here to here. And that should fix all of those nGons on the bottom. And then for the top, we're going to, let's try to figure this out a little bit. So let's go ahead and join this one with this one. I'm going to delete these edges here. Zoom in a little bit so we can see that better. Control delete. I'm actually going to go from here to here, or here. And then, believe it or not, this may seem a bit weird. It will make sense here in a moment, but I'm going to delete this one. And now let's do the same thing for the other side. Well, let's just delete these edges. I'm going to connect that one there, that one there. And again, I'm just using my G key G for gaming controller, and that repeats the last action. Now these should be pretty easy here. I should be able to just kind of connect these up. We'll go from here to here. And for this one, we'll make a little triangle right here. So we'll go from here to here to here, like that. We'll do the same thing for this corner. Okay, so now we're left with basically 3 nGons. We have this big one right here, which I'm not concerned about. And then we have these two on either side. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to draw an edge all the way from this point right here to this point, again with my multi-cut tool. So I'm going to go from here to here. And then for this guy right here, let's actually just go from here up to here. And that should be good enough for now. We can always change it later if you don't like the way things are, or if you need something to be different later, we can always change them. Okay, so now I have the basic controller blocked out here. The next thing that we're going to work on is our islands for our buttons. Now, what I mean as the islands for the buttons are these little gray areas right here where our buttons sort of like live on top of. That's the next thing that we're going to create. Okay, so let's get started with creating those little islands for our buttons. Now, I'm going to start with the easiest ones, which are going to be this guy right here. And we're just going to start with a cube. So let's create a cube, move that into position. Now, there's no reason to create multiples of things. In Maya, you can just, it's much smarter to just create sort of one. And then if you have identical copies of that one, after you get that one created, you can just, duplicate that one over and have a copy. So we're going to start here with just a cube. Let's jump over to our side view, or our perspective view, I mean. I'm going to scale down this cube a little bit and kind of move this into position here like this. And I basically want the top of this cube, so I want this face right here to be level or the same height as this face right here. So I want the top of my cube for this island to be the same level as this one here. So to do that, I'm going to grab that face, and then we're going to hold down our V key. So V as in vector. So V will basically turn on, or vertice, will turn on snap to points. So you can see that being toggled right up there. Hold down the V key, click on the axis that you want to snap it to, or that you want to snap. So I'm going to click and hold. And while holding my mouse button, I'm just going to hover over the point that I want it to be snapped to. So right there. Okay, so now if we look at this from our side view, we go into wireframe view, we can see that the height or the top point of that cube is directly the same exact height as our controller itself. And then the next thing I want to do is to do some bevels. So let's go ahead and bevel these 4 corners. Again, we're going to do the bigger bevels first. And we may want to jump over to our top view, kind of keep an eye on how much these bevels need to be beveled. I know that I'm going to need a little bit of extra topology in here to make this round area for my buttons. So in a situation like this, I think it's okay to add, a few more segments than you need to in your bevels, just so you have a little bit extra geometry in here. I think that's absolutely fine. So we'll do 4 segments for this bevel. And I think a fraction of 0.2 looks pretty good the way it is. We could probably go a tiny bit less and maybe type this in something like 0.15. See that? I think that's a little too not enough. So let's try let's split the difference and do 0.175. So you can also type values in there. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay, and then we need to bevel the outside of it a little bit. So I'm going to select all of those outside edges. Like so. And then we'll hit that with a bevel. And for this one, I just need a 1 segment bevel. And let's do a fraction of 1 is probably good for something like that. Okay. Now we can create the hole where our buttons are going to go. Now this is actually going to be really easy to do for now. We will add some more details to this later. Oops, and it looks like I forgot an edge when I beveled. So let's go ahead and back up and reselect that. So very important to just kind of double check and make sure you get all of your edges that you want to bevel before you bevel or after them. And I think let's go with a value of 0.2. I think that looks pretty good. Okay, and then as far as the hole where our button is going to go, for now, all we need to do is create a circle in here. So I'm going to select this face here, and I'm going to go to my scale tool, hold down Shift to extrude that in. Like so. Let's make it kind of small. It'll make it a little bit easier for us here in a second. And then I'm going to jump over to my top view again. And I'm going to use this circularize function. So what that's going to do is take this little square shape or square face and turn that into a circle. Just like that. And now I can kind of scale that to shape or scale that to the right size. So something about like that is pretty good. And for now, that's all we really need for this shape, right? I don't really need to, I could delete this, but we're just going to leave it the way it is for now. And then instead of making another one, I can just select this one. Let's go to our top view, hit Control or Command D to duplicate, and just duplicate over a copy. Right. So that one was pretty easy. Next one, we're going to do this guy. And for this one, we're actually not going to worry about the buttonholes yet because I'm going to show you a different way to sort of do those here in a little bit. So we're going to once again, we're going to start with a cube. So I'm just going to move a cube to the correct position. Scale that into shape. And just like we did with our buttons here, I'm going to move this up a little bit. I'm going to select this top face and I want to snap that to the same position as everything else. I want it to be level with the top of my controller. So I'm going to hold down V for vector, click and hold the axis that I want to snap that along, and then just drag my mouse to the point or another face that I want that to snap to. So something like that. And now this is kind of a very similar situation to the actual controller body itself, right? So we have this square shape. It has sort of round corners and it has like this inset area on the inside. So we can kind of do this the same way we did our controller body. So again, we're going to start with the big bevels and work our way down to the smaller bevels. But first, I'm going to do the same thing I did for the controller body here. We're going to grab this top face, and this time I'm just going to hold down Shift with my scale tool and scale that inward. And then same thing we did before, I'm just going to grab my edges and adjust them to sort of match the profile there. And then I'm going to do that one more time, select it in face mode. Hold down scale, scale that in a little bit. And then just adjust those edges to match. Just something like that. And then in my perspective view here, I'm just going to grab this face and move it down a little bit like that. Right. And now we can work on our bevels. So for these bevels, we're going to go to edge mode, and we're just going to do this whole line here. Let's see if we can get this to work. It may not. If it doesn't, that's okay. But we're going to see if we can just get this whole sort of line to bevel properly. So let's select those and click our bevel function. And for these, we'll do 2 segments, and probably something like that looks pretty spot on. Maybe 0.22 or 0.25. I think 0.25 looks pretty good. I think they are a little bit more square here, as we can see. So let's go back to 0.2. I think 0.2 is a happy medium, and then we can adjust these points here in a moment. Let's take these 3 points here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select these, and this is a good opportunity for us to use our target weld function. So I'm just going to go into vertex mode. I want to make sure that I don't have any vertices selected already. Then we're going to use our target weld function, and I'm just going to weld these to the middle one all around. Right, and then I'm going to jump back into my top view, and I'm just going to readjust where my edges are, like so. Okay, and now this one does have a little bit of an edge, just like our button islands here. So I'm going to click that outer edge and do another bevel, and we'll try to get this about the same as these buttons, which I think was a value of 0.5, maybe 0.6. I think 0.5 is probably what we're looking for there. So something like that. Looks pretty good. Okay, and then next we have our D-pad button, or a D-pad island. So we're not working on the button yet, but we're working on the island. And for this one, we're also going to use a cube to begin with. So I'm going to just create a cube. Put that into position. And kind of scale that up where the corners, these corners meet the outer corners here on this. Something about like that. And then kind of a repeat of what we did here. I'm going to grab the entire cube, move it up. I'm going to grab this face, hold down V, and snap it with one of those other top faces there, so everything's lined up perfectly with the top. Now we're going to extrude our directional areas. So to do this, I'm going to select all 4 of these areas like this. I'm then going to use my extrude function. And you'll notice that now if I go to add thickness to it, it's going to extrude out like that. That's not necessarily what I want. So I'm going to undo that. And instead, I'm going to come down here to this keep faces together option, which is currently turned on. And I'm going to turn that off. So now when I pull this out, it's going to extrude each one of those faces individually, detached from each other and not together. So let's jump back over to our top view and just line that up as close as we can get it, like that. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is some bevels. So I want to bevel the corners. We're going to bevel all of these outside corners, not the inside corners, just the outside corners. And hit that with bevel. And I think something around that looks pretty good. A value of, let's go higher than point. Let's go to point. Let's do 0.2 and we'll just do 2 segments there for this one. And then I want to bevel the outside, very similar to what I have on the other little islands there. And probably a value, again, I want this to look kind of the same value we have here. So 0.2 and a fraction of 1 looks pretty, or a segment of 1 and a fraction of 0.2 looks pretty good. Okay, so we have our initial islands staged there. The next thing we're going to do here is combine everything together and sort of go in and fix some geometry a little bit before we go in and add our buttons. All right, now to combine these objects together, see that we currently have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects. We're going to use something called Booleans. Now, Booleans is a very fun little feature to use. It's really cool. The one caveat being that it can cause a lot of nGons. It can make a lot of nGons in your geometry. So you kind of have to be respectful of it and use it with caution. But we're going to use Booleans to join these up. And I'll kind of show you how Booleans work as we go. So the first thing we want to do is just select the main, sort of like your main object first, and then we'll shift select another object that we have here. Then I'm going to go to Mesh, Booleans, and in this case, we're just going to do a union. And basically what that will do is sort of give you this live interface of where you can sort of join things up and move them around. Now, what's cool about this is you can't, it's not just combining or uniting 2 objects together. We can come over here to our Boolean menu and change this to something like difference. And you can see that it moves that, or it sort of cuts that object away, which is really cool, right? And I can even come in here and select this and move it around and sort of change that. So Booleans is a very cool feature. In this case, I just want to unite or union these objects. So I'm going to do that with my little D-pad island. And then to bring the other objects in, we can just middle mouse, drag them in to that Boolean feature. So let's just middle mouse polycube 5, or polycubes 5 already in there. So let's do polycube 4. Make sure that we have the right surfaces being brought in. Yep. and then 3 and 2, and then 1 is sort of like our main item there. So let's bring in 3 and 2 as well. And then we can see that those are all sort of combined up together. Now I can see already we have a lot of nGons here that we're going to have to fix up. And our Boolean operation is still live, right? So that means that I can still grab things and move them around and have it change the geometry for me. So in order to commit this change to our object, in order to sort of commit this Boolean function or Boolean operation to our object, we need to delete the history on it. So we're going to select our poly surface here, which is the entire Boolean shape. And I'm going to go up to Edit, Delete by Type, History. And then you'll see that in my outliner, all of those objects disappear because now they've become one. It's deleted that Boolean operation. And now all 5 of those objects are one object. Now, the one issue here is that, of course, it created nGons. So let's go in and start fixing up some of these nGons where we can. Now, I think that I'm probably going to want a little bit of extra geometry overall to sort of fix those nGons to begin with. So the first thing I want to do is just to go in and add some extra edge loops in my model. And this would just help with fixing those nGons. So to do that, I'm going to select my object, use my multi-cut tool, and let's do this from the top view here. And I'm just going to try to sort of line some of these up a little bit. Again, they don't have to be perfect, but they should be kind of close. So I'm trying to spread them out kind of evenly here. We can do one right down the middle as well. And then let's do one. Let's do one just in the middle here. So 50%. And then we'll do another one in the middle or maybe down here somewhere for that one. Now, when you create Booleans, a lot of times what happens is or not Booleans, forgive me. When you create new edge loops, a lot of times what happens with these is that we'll kind of try to match the flow of the other geometry around. So one thing that I like to do to fix this, as long as it's on a flat surface, perpendicular to sort of the direction that you're going to be scaling it in, you can double click that entire edge and just scale that in like that. And that would just be a straight line. So I'm going to do that to all of my new edge loops that I just created here. Just select them and just double click to select them all. And then I'm just using scale to kind of scale them in. So they scale in and they're nice and straight all the way around my controller. Okay, so now my biggest issue next is that some of the edges that were created here with the Booleans, they're kind of in the middle of something like this. So they're not very optimized, right? They're kind of, for this one here, for example, see how it's an edge that's just sort of in the middle of this one. And I kind of want this to be connected to these vertices. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab my target weld tool, and I'm just going to kind of go through and weld some of these up as I'm looking at them to a more appropriate place. So like right there. So they're kind of welded to a vertice rather than an edge, if that makes sense. Some of them are already going to be connected up. Some of them are going to be really close, but not quite, like that one. right? I think the rest of them are good. And then the next thing I want to do is just go in with my multi-cut tool and start sort of fixing a lot of these ngon areas. So a lot of these are going to be pretty easy, especially the ones that are sort of in the middle of two different areas, like that one there. And this may take some time. In fact, I find that cleaning up nGons is probably one of the more time consuming things when it comes to modeling. That's why you want to sort of take care of them as they happen and not just do them all at once, right? Not wait till the end and do them all, but just sort of kind of take care of them as they happen. And sometimes you're going to need to delete some edges, right? Like we can get rid of this one. And that way we can kind of connect these up. Now, when we're doing low poly modeling like this, triangles are absolutely fine. We're not too concerned about just um, sticking to quads. We can have triangles. The difficult thing about triangles is that after a while they become kind of difficult to manage. You know, you can't add edge loops through them, right? So if I tried to add an edge loop through here, it just wouldn't work because, you know, it stops at nGons and triangles. But I'm just going through kind of using my best judgment to make all of these either quads or triangles. And like I said, sometimes this can be a bit time consuming, but it's the nature of the beast. It's something that we got to do and sort of fix these issues as we come. The one thing that I'm trying not to do is get too many edge loops that are really bunched up and tight to each other. So that's one thing I want to try to spread everything out evenly. So I don't, I don't want to do something like this because I feel like that's going to create a face that's just a little bit too tight. And then as you're working, you're going to get to a point where you're like, okay, I think I got them all. Let me check to make sure. In which case you can just select your entire object and go back up to mesh cleanup. And that will show you where all of your nGons are. So for example, I forgot one right here. And then I have some weird ones here that I need to deal with as well. So I think these are nGons. We can see that this one has 5 sides. So I think that one right there is just something that I sort of forgot about. So let's just carry on and try to fix as much of these as we can. And I may do a little time lapse here. I may speed up a little bit here in the video, just so we're not wasting time and you can kind of get an idea of what I'm doing here. All right. So I think for the most part, I have all of those on the face connected up properly. I'm going to do one more little check here just by going to mesh cleanup. And that shows me that I do have some that I still need to sort of take care of here. So some of these are going to be fairly easy. Some of them are going to be more difficult. So what I like to do to keep track of my nGons as I'm modeling and as I'm using mesh cleanup is I'll assign a new material to them. So to do that, what we're going to do is do mesh cleanup. That will select our faces for us. We're then going to right click, go to assign favorite material, and we're going to assign a standard surface material to this. Then our standard surface material will pop up in our attribute editor. I'm going to give this a name, something like nGon matte. And I'm going to change the color to red. And then all of our nGons are going to turn red. So now anytime I go through, as I'm going through and I'm fixing my nGons and I want to do another check on them, then I can just use that and change the color again. So I'll show you how that works here and how I use this. So for example, I have a couple of nGons here that let me just fix these really quick, again, by using my multi-cut tool. There's some of them in situations like this where I'm not sure why those are nGons yet, but we'll take a look at those. But first, I'm just going to fix the ones that I can. These I'm not worried about. We're gonna change those up a little bit. But I'm just going to kind of fix the ones that I can. And the ones that I'm not sure about, we're just going to leave them. So as you go through and you're checking for nGons, what you can do is reassign your original material. So I'll select my object, right click and hold, and go down to assign existing material. And then we have standard surface 1. That's our original default material. I'll reassign that one to it. Everything goes gray again. I'm going to do a mesh cleanup one more time. It's going to select my nGons. And then once again, I'm just going to hover over one of those selected faces, right click, and then assign existing material, nGon matte. And now it's selected those nGons for me. Now, I think some of these nGons, and again, I'm not worried about these. In fact, let's go ahead and just delete these, the very top ones here, and leave some holes in our geometry like that. We'll fix those later. And let's look at these. Now, a lot of these are nGons because of our Boolean operation. And in some situations, we may have just two verts that are right on top of each other. A lot of times you can tell just by moving a vert and then undoing to find the right one. Right, and there's the one right there that's kind of causing that nGon. And these are just right on top of each other. If you have vertices that are right on top of each other, a really quick and easy way you can attempt to fix this is just to select all of the vertices on your model and then come up to Edit Mesh Merge. And what that will do is any vertices that are just like super close to each other or right on top of each other, it'll just merge them together. Right, so let's do that. And then we'll do one more little quick check. Let's again reassign our default material and do a mesh cleanup. And you can see that now it's selected no faces. So it fixed all of those nGons for us. So that mesh cleanup is very useful. Applying a material to it as you're going so you can kind of see where your nGons are is also very useful. So the next thing we're going to do is start creating our buttons. Okay, now the buttons are going to be fairly easy, especially since we have sort of like them framed up already. We can use what we have already to create our buttons. So we have our directional buttons and we have our A and B buttons, but let's create holes for our start and select buttons. So to do that, we're once again going to be using Booleans. I'm going to start by creating a cylinder. And I want this cylinder, if we look at this from a top view, I want this cylinder to be flat on the top and the bottom so that I can sort of stretch it out a little bit. So to do this, we're going to go to our channel box editor, and I want to change the number of divisions that I have here till it has like a flat top and bottom. So that is about 18. I could probably go down to like 14, and actually I think that looks okay. So let's go with 14 for these. And then I'm just going to sort of move this into position here, scale it to shape. I'm going to grab this in vertex mode and just grab half of it and just stretch it out like so. I'm not worried about what the internal geometry of this looks like. And then let's duplicate this. So Control D to duplicate, and then just move this over to the other button. And then I'm going to select both of these. Let's jump back over to our perspective view. Let's move these up a little bit just so they're sort of above that area. And once again, we're going to use Booleans. So I'm going to select this main shape here. I'm going to hold down Shift and select one of these shapes and go to Mesh Booleans. And for this one, I want to do cutout. And that's sort of the opposite result that I wanted. So let's try, instead of cutout, let's try something like slice. And yeah, slice is something a little bit more along the lines of what I want here. And then let's just middle mouse drag our other cylinder in here, and we'll set that one also to slice. And then just like we did before, I'm going to select my entire Boolean shape, and we're going to go to Edit, Delete by Type, History. And that will sort of commit those Boolean functions to shape. Right now I can just delete these faces to make the holes for our geometry. Now, in some cases like this, it does create some other interior geometry that I do not like. So we can just kind of come through and delete all of this as well. I think this is just because I used that slice function. A really easy way to select all of this stuff at once would be to just sort of come over here and marquee over all of this. And then we can hold down Control and just deselect the areas that we don't want to delete. Just if you do that, just do a double check. Make sure that you don't have any other edges selected that you may delete by accident. And we'll just hit delete and get rid of those. Okay, now I'm going to clean those up pretty much the same way I did the controller. We're going to start just by using target weld if we can. And I think the only one that's problematic here is this one and maybe this one down here. So let's use target weld to clean those up. I'm actually probably going to delete that one at some point anyway. And then we can use multi-cut to come in and start fixing the rest of these. Again, don't forget you can use your cleanup function to check for nGons and then change the material to make it a bit easier to navigate. I'm going to delete this edge here. And we're just going to turn these guys into triangles all the way up here into the corners. The way that I like to do this is I just click on an edge and then I slide until it stops, and then I know those vertices are meeting. Sometimes it's a little weird because if you don't click on an edge and kind of click off of it, it will just want to do a slice like that, in which case you can just kind of hit undo. So just sort of be careful about that there. Just make sure you have that edge highlighted before you go to click and slide. Let's, we can keep that guy there for now. Typically, I wouldn't want to try to avoid all of these bunching up like this, but I don't really see another solution in this case. So I think it's going to be okay. I don't think it will cause too many issues for us. All right, so that looks pretty good. Let's select our object and double check for nGons. No nGons, so we're good. And now we can start working on our buttons. So for these two buttons, I kind of want to do them together. I want to do them at the same time so I can make sure that their values or they're going to be identical basically. So same with these two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of these interior edges, and we're going to start just by extruding both of those straight down. And then I'm going to use my extrude function to give them a little bit of a thickness. And by a little bit, I mean, let's do a very low amount. So something like 0.02. Whoops, I hit the wrong button there. So let's try 0.02. Let's see. Yeah, maybe a little bit more. Maybe you could try 0.03, but that's pretty good like that. And then I'm going to extrude those straight up, and I just want them poking out a little bit beyond. So maybe something like that. And then once again, I'm going to extrude them in using my extrude function with thickness to maybe something about there. Then I can grab these outer areas here and we'll add our bevel to them. So just a tiny little bit of a bevel to those. They probably don't need much of a bevel, but I think a little bit of a bevel would be nice. And then we'll add a little bit of a bevel to our outer circles of our buttons here. And this one I want to look a little bit more round. So I'm going to up the segments to 2. And we'll do a fraction of something like 0.4. Right. And if I remember right, our NES controllers do have a little bit of an indentation to them. So I'm going to bring down the surface just a little bit. And then with those interior edges selected there, we're going to go to Mesh, Fill Hole, and that will fill those holes in. And then we can come in with our multi-cut tool and just kind of join these back up so it's not a giant nGon. Again, using this multi-cut tool does take some getting used to with the way that I use it. But after a while, it does sort of just become like second nature. Right. And then after we have that grid pattern in there, we can even, let's actually do it Yeah, let's go ahead and do it for this one here, and then we'll do it for the other one too. It's okay if they're a little bit off. But once we have that grid pattern in there, what we can do is grab these verts and these verts. And we can scale them out a tiny bit. And then we can even grab these and move them down to make them even more of like an indented surface, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's do that for this one as well. Trying to get them as close as possible to each other. So let's try to make our grid pattern the same for both of these. That's going to be 4 edges going straight down and 4 edges going straight across. Like that. Then going to select these verts that are just right here in the square, except for the corners. And I just rotate like that because I want to make sure that I don't accidentally have a vert selected down here. And just rotating my camera will show me that because a pivot point will always be in the center of my rotation. We'll scale that out a tiny bit. Then we'll select those corner edges and move those down like so. Now, if I want to separate these buttons from the controller, which I'll probably want to do, I may even want to move them up a little bit more. All I have to do is select this interior edge that I created. It might be easier to do from the bottom too, or from the inside, right? So I can go on the inside and just shift click one of those faces and then shift double click the one next to it and just delete that whole face. And I'll do that for the other one too. And that will separate our buttons from the controller, so they could then be animated. I do think they need to move up a little bit, but we'll do that here in a minute. Okay, so we're then going to create our buttons here in the same exact way. So I'm going to select these guys, We'll do the extrude function. And I want to use my widget. If I don't use my widget, it may extrude in not uniformly. So I just want to make sure that I'm using my widget to extrude. So we're going to start by extruding down with thickness. And then we're going to hit extrude again, and we're going to extrude in with offset, or no, thickness again. And again, we did a pretty low value. So it's something like I think we did like 0.025, something like that. Yep, I think that's good. And then we'll extrude straight up. Like so. We'll hit extrude again, and again, do that within thickness. So just to kind of go in a little bit like that. And then with those edges still selected, we can go to mesh, fill hole, fill those in, and then just use our multi-cut tool to kind of go in and join up some of those edges so they're no longer nGons. So I think something like this will look pretty good. So let's do that for both of those. Okay, and then I'm going to bevel the outer edges of these guys. So we'll hit it with bevel. Again, I'm going to do 2 segments for these. And these are pretty round, so we'll do a little bit of a higher fraction, something like 0.6. And then we can go on in the inside, and the same way we separated the other ones, we can just go ahead and delete that inner ring of faces, and that way they'll be separate. All right, so we have our start select buttons. We have our AB buttons. Next, we're going to do our directional pad. which is a little bit more of an issue because we have to do a little bit more work on the little island itself before we make the directional pad button. All right, so for the directional pad button, what we need to do first is extrude in a little bit. So if we look in here, we have this sort of outer edge. So let's go ahead and select this outer edge. And I want to extrude in a little bit. So again, I don't want to extrude in with just my scale tool because it doesn't always extrude in properly when you do it that way, right? See how these sides are extruding in a lot further up and down. So I want to extrude in instead with my actual extrude function. And that way it will, when I do thickness, it will extrude in a bit more uniformly with the exception of these corners here, but we can fix those really quickly. So to fix those, I'm going to use snapping. I'm going to snap this corner to that one there. So I'm just going to grab that and again, hold down V, and I'm going to hold down the axis I want it to snap to and then hover over the point that I want it to snap to. So I'm going to do that for that one. And then this for that one. And I'm just going to quickly do that for all of my corners there. I just want those to be in a straight line, straight up and down and straight side to side. You want to be careful to get them snapped properly. You can see that I messed up on this one. I snapped it to this point instead of that point. So just be careful and make sure that you get those lines as straight as you possibly can. Like so. And it looks like for some reason it extruded those down a little bit as well, but that's an easy fix. I can just select that entire interior circle there or interior edge. And once again, hold down snap, hold down the axis that you want to snap it along, hold down your left click, and then just hover over the point you want it to snap to. And that snaps it up like that. Now, if I want to make double sure that that's flat, which I can see currently it's not, I'm first going to scale it in like so, and then snap it. All right, so now it should be perfectly flat and everything looks good. And then I can just extrude this straight down like that. And then the next thing I want to do here with this is bevel these interior corners, because if we look at our reference here, those interior corners are a tiny bit round. So I'm going to grab those interior corners and bevel those. Let's look at our top view while we're doing that. We'll do 2 segments. And we'll do something like that. Now this will create nGons. Not a big deal though, because I can really easily just go to vertex mode, use my target weld button or target weld function, and just kind of weld this point up to that point. All right, now for the D-pad itself, I think I'm going to do that as a separate object. I think it might be a bit easier than worrying about extruding it off from here. So let's go ahead and make a new cube. And I want to do this in my top view again, so I can sort of line everything up properly. We'll make it just a new cube, sort of the same way we did for the little island for the D-pad. And I'm just going to scale this to position of just sort of like the interior of that D-pad. like that. And let's move this guy up a little bit so we can see it. And then the same way I did before, I'm going to grab these four sides and we'll do an extrude function, but we're going to keep faces together off. And then I can just extrude those out until I get them looking pretty close to where they should be. Right, so something along the lines of that. Now, I know that it does go out in this direction a little bit, so we'll kind of fix that here in a second. Actually, we'll go ahead and do that right now. I'm just going to take the entire outside edge. Let's actually go into the inside, the bottom through here, and let's delete these bottom faces since we're not going to see them. And I'm going to select this outside edge here, and we're going to try to just scale it up uniformly. So we get some of like an angle here. Maybe move our D-pad down a little bit. Now I also noticed that these edges kind of come up a little bit. So to kind of do that, I'm going to take these four edges here and move them down like that. So I think that's a little bit more along the lines of what our D-pad looks like or should look like, right? So we have the overall shape of it. Let's make sure we get it in sort of like a good position here. It's a little bit off compared to everything else. If I can select it. So let's kind of just move it to the right area here. You may be even able to scale it up a little bit. I just kind of want to get it centered. I want it to look like it's in the right spot. All right, so then we can work on our bevels. So we know that it's going to be beveled on pretty much all of its corners. It's got like an equal bevel all the way around its corners. So let's go ahead and select those first. Like that, and we can do a bevel. And we don't need much for this one. I think maybe segments of 2 and a fraction of 0.2. That looks pretty good. I'm going to grab this face right here and we'll go ahead and delete it. You'll see why here in a second. And I'm going to delete these corners as well. And then I'm going to grab this entire interior area here and just scale it in a little bit. Again, you'll see why I do that here in a second. And then I also need the entire sort of edge wrapping around to be beveled as well. All right, so we're going to select all those surrounding edges and we'll hit those with a bevel as well, just 2 segments, and probably a fraction of 0.5 is fine. It looks fine for that. And then we need to fix some nGons. So this is going to be quite easy for us. This is going to give us a little bit more geometry to kind of play around in here in the center, because we have a sort of circular indentation here in the center of our D-pad. If you look at reference. Now we could, let's see if we can make it work with what we have first. So let's go here, just select this interior area and we'll do circularize. Now, sometimes when you use the circularize function, it does kind of spin things around like this. You can use the twist attribute here to kind of level that back out as much as possible. And let's scale that in. I think this actually looks fine for what we need. Let's leave that like that. And then we'll fix our nGons here. Should be very easy. All we have to do here is connect up a couple edges. Then we can just connect these like that. And that should fix all of our nGons. We'll do a check to make sure. Right, so after that, we'll select our model. Let's go ahead and just select all of our models, all of our objects here, and do a mesh cleanup. And we're good. If you see green vertices like this just means that your UVs have issues, which we haven't really got into yet. So for now, you can kind of ignore them if you see green vertices, and we'll get into UVs eventually. And then for this interior spot here, all we have to do is use extrude. So we can extrude it in a little bit and kind of move it down. And then I'll extrude it in a little bit more, move it down, right? And then we can go to mesh, fill hole to fill that in. And then we can just connect up our verts to fix our nGons. So we'll just do something like this. All right, so now our Nintendo controller, our NES controller is almost complete. We have a few more things we want to work on. One of them is a little notch right here, and the other one is a hole for our cable, and then our cable itself. Okay, so now it's time to model in our notch and our hole for the cord. Now, so when it comes to the notch, what I'm talking about is this little area right here, and then we have the hole right under that for the cord. So let's start, we'll probably use Booleans for a portion of these, but let's start with the notch here. So let's create a cube. And just kind of move that in position for now. And we're going to have to eyeball it a little bit. So I think it's probably going to be something like that. And with this cube, I'm going to go ahead and bevel my edges. I'm just hitting this button here so I can see my wireframe a little bit better as I'm working. That's something that I like to kind of turn on and off occasionally. So I'm going to grab the entire cube here and we're going to bevel it. We're going to do a small bevel, not much. I think something like that is actually probably fine. And then I'm just going to move that straight down to about halfway, something like that. And then for the cord area, we're just going to take a cylinder. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees. I'm going to move it into position. Look at that from our top view. We'll scale it down And all I'm looking for this is like a cutout edge. So sort of like we did with our start and select buttons. So that's all I'm really looking for this. And I don't think we need this many divisions for this hole. So I'm going to go to my poly cylinder inputs and let's decrease this something like 12. I do want to make sure that this lines up as closely as possible to this edge, because that's just going to make life a little bit easier for me down the road here. So with those selected, let's go ahead and make our Boolean. So I'm going to select this one, and then I'm going to select our notch, and I'm going to do mesh, Booleans, and we're going to do difference A from B. And that will cut that out for me exactly how I want it to be there. And then I'm going to middle mouse drag my cylinder in here. And I'm just going to change my cylinder. Actually, we can keep it to union. Union would actually work fine for what I want. So we'll just keep it at union for now, like that. And then I'm going to, once again, I'm going to commit this Boolean function to my model. So I'm going to select the poly cylinder here and go to Edit, Delete All by Type, History. And then everything is sort of committed. Now for the circle here, I can just grab these faces and delete them. That's all I really need to do for now. And my mesh turns green. This is a common thing that happens as you're modeling in Maya. There's a few different reasons this happens. The main one being that it gets disconnected from its material. It's common, it happens, you should know how to fix it. And the easy way to fix it is just to select your object in object mode and then right click, go down to assign existing material, and then reassign your standard surface one, which we've already done using your nGon material, right? And that fixes the issue. Not a big deal. Happens occasionally. You just got to know how to fix it. Okay, so the next thing I want to do here, let's clean this up a little bit and let's perhaps bevel this a little bit. So let me go through and just delete. I just want to delete these edges on this flat side here for both of these. So I'm just going to control delete those. And then let's go ahead and select our outer edges here. And I just want to do a tiny bevel on these. Probably about the same amount as here. So hit that with a bevel. We'll do a fraction of 0.2. And I think that's fine. I think that looks pretty good like that. And then we just need to go through and fix up our nGons. Right? An easy solution that we should be used to doing already. Now for the bottom part of the nGons, I'm going to go ahead and use these as an opportunity to kind of fix the nGons on my little circle down here as well. So I'm just kind of making triangles. And again, just sliding on those edges to kind of connect them up. Let's just make sure we got the right edges selected. Oops. And then finally, I want to make sure that these guys right here that I lined up are actually connected. So I'm going to go to my vertex mode and I'm just going to click and select that and move it around and then undo just to make sure that those actually lined up properly. And they did. So that's good. We have this interior area here, which is nGon, and that's a super easy fix. All I have to do is connect that one edge there and both of those become quads. Same here. Okay. Now I can select that interior spot there, and we're just going to, let's go ahead and extrude in. I'm going to kind of manually create a little bit of a bevel here. So I'm going to extrude in a little bit and then scale in a little bit like that, just to create a little bit of a bevel. And then we're going to move down a little bit like that. And then we're going to scale in and kind of get like a funnel like shape happening. So just using scale, holding down shift to extrude and moving it in. I want to create sort of like a funnel shape here. And that's where my chord's going to go. Probably go a little bit further in. So something like that. Yep. So that's where my chord is going to go. Let's do one last check for nGons. So to do that easily, I'm going to go ahead and select everything and combine them together. So I'm going to go to Mesh, Combine, and that will combine my D-pad with the controller body. I want to delete my history on it. So I'm going to click this right here, which will delete history. And then in the outliner, you should just see one object here. And we're going to go to Mesh, Clean Up. And again, it's only selecting those green verts, which are UVs we haven't dealt with yet. So for the most part, our NES controller is done. There's a few more things we need to do with it, including adding the chord, fixing some of our normals, which I'll talk about here in a second, and making it where we can't see through the gaps. So currently we can kind of see through the gaps there. So now let's go through and fix our normals. Now, if you aren't aware of what normals are, I do have a brief video explaining that and everything you need to know to get started with Maya. But basically, normals are just the way that the light hits the surface, or each polygon has its own specific normal. And as you're modeling, your normals are going to kind of be all over the place. So, for example, if I turn the wireframe off on this and we look at some parts of this, some of it's going to look really nice and smooth and round, and some of it's going to look kind of faceted, right? Like we have these flat geometry or flat polygons in here. Same over here, we have these flat polygons. I don't really want that. I want it all to look how I want it to look, right? I want the hard edges to look like they're hard, and I want the soft edges to look like they're soft and smooth. So to do that, we need to fix the normals. Now, the way I like to do that is just to grab my entire object and go to Mesh Display and soften the edge on the entire object. Now, that's going to mess things up quite a bit, right? When we do that, because it's going to take, let's do that real quick. Mesh Display, soften edge, because it's going to take a lot of the areas that we wanted to look creased or hardened and make them look soft. And it's going to give us a lot of like this weird artifacting stuff in here. But this is a good starting point. And from here, all we need to do is go in and start selecting the edges that we want to appear to be a hardened edge or a hardened crease, and we can harden those individually. So I'm going to do that really quick here. As an example, let's just start with these outside and inner two edges. So let me go through and select all the way around here. Whoops. Select that inner edge. Make sure that you only select the edges that you want. And sometimes you need to zoom in a little bit to get the right one selected. Like that. All right. Let's do a double check. I was kind of wild there with my selection. So let me just make sure that I have the right thing selected. And then I'm going to go to Mesh Display, harden edge. Right now, that hasn't changed the polygons or the topology of our model at all, but it's made a big difference in how it looks, right? So let's go and just quickly do that throughout the rest of our model. And I'm just going to use the G key. So I'm going to go through and select the edges. Whoops. That I want to be hardened. And because I've already used, that was the last tool or function that I used. If I hit the G key now, let me just double check. I got the right edges selected, right? It's going to harden those edges for me. I know I have a seam here, so I want to go ahead and harden that one, even though it's probably not going to make that much of a difference. I want to harden this outer one here as well. And this inner one here. And we'll go back to our object mode, take a look at that. It looks pretty good with the exception of some stuff going on in here and here, in which case I think I just need to harden the outside edge of these guys. And that fixed that one, but I still have a little bit of an issue with these. So let's try that again. I think maybe maybe we need to harden these. I think so. I think we need to harden these bevels right here to fix that. And we'll go ahead and harden these bevels as well. And these bevels as well. So yeah, that looks way better. Everything here looks good. Now, one thing I want to do, or one thing I often do in models like this, where there's areas where you can kind of see through the area because we have a gap here in our model, is to fix that, I'll just make a little polygon plane, like a one, no divisions, just a polygon plane that stretches the length of that area where we see through. Right, something like this. And then I'm just going to set that just below the surface. So we can't end up, we get a little polygon under there and we don't see all the way through to the edge. And when it comes time to texturing this, we can just make that one little polygon black so we don't see through to the inside of the model. Okay, and now finally, our very last step here is we're going to add the chord for our controller. So to do that, we're going to use curves and something called mesh sweep. So let's go over to our curves menu first. Let's go to our top menu here. I'm going to do something a little bit more interesting than this. So I'm going to start just with my EP curve tool right here. And I'm just going to, the inside here, I'm going to click and start just sort of drawing a curve going something like this. Something that would be, let's actually back up and make it a little bit smoother. All right, so let's just undo that. And I want something that would kind of eventually just sort of go off camera. Right, if I were to model this, this would just kind of go off camera. Then in our perspective view here, what we can do is grab these points and we can kind of move them down a little bit. So I can do some really interesting things with them, like move them up a little bit, move them down so I can adjust this curve. Okay, and then with that curve selected, that happens to be right in the center of my grid, so I don't need to adjust the position of that, right? Because it's pretty much where the center of my model is already, but otherwise you could just adjust the position of that. I'm going to go back to my poly modeling menu, and we're going to use sweep mesh right here. And then we'll adjust some of the settings here. So the first thing I'm going to adjust is the scale profile. I'm going to bring that way down. Let's look inside here. Let's get nice and close so we can kind of get that to be about the same. And I'm going to adjust my sides to be the same as the sides of this guy. So I think that was 14. I think that's what we were at 14. And then we can still adjust our scale a little bit. And then the precision right here is going to be our divisions along the curve. So I can up the precision to something like 90%. And now we're going to get a nice, smooth, long curve. Okay. Now, for the most part, we are done with our NES controller. And the next thing in the next video we're going to dive into is UVs. So we're going to talk about how to lay out the UVs for something like this so we can then add a texture map or image map to it.